You are listening to the Bell Post. Welcome to episode 60 of the Bell Post. On today's episode, we have as our guest John Gimbel, the district clerk from McLennan County. Welcome, John. Welcome to the Bell Post.
Howdy, good to see you and reconnect.
Well, we've been planning this for several weeks, and on my notes, I don't know, for whatever reason, but I've had a completely different county as your county. And every time our committee talks about it, I'm like, oh, that's wrong. He's not from Montgomery County. He's from McLennan County. I need to update that. And every week I haven't. And then I'm like, I am going to say that you are from Montgomery County, and sure enough, I'm hoping that I don't do that. But I like to research people instead of just say, "Hey, tell me about yourself." But it seems like you've kind of been in the McLennan County area almost all your life.
Yeah, I was born in Austin. We moved up to Woodway right outside of Waco when I was 4, almost 5. So
wow.
And then I spent about 3 years out in El Paso working for my uncle in an accounting firm, and almost a year on the border of the state guard.
My dad was a football coach, and I used to tell the story that it would take my dad a year or 2 years to make enough parents mad that we would have to move on to the next school. So as a result, we kind of lived all over Texas till we got to probably middle school. We got to Gorman, Texas, which is in Eastland County, and they lived there the rest of their lives until they retired and then passed away. But you're in your second term. Go ahead.
Peanut and pecan farmers aren't
there? Oh,
peanuts.
I don't think, when I grew up moving irrigation pipe in the peanut fields, and I think the land's played out since then. But yeah, I grew up moving. That's exactly what I did. Irrigation pipe for the peanut fields. And you woke up smelling peanuts roasting every morning. And now
did it smell like money?
No, it did not. It smelled like
Have you heard that one before about smelling like money?
No, I have not.
My granddad was visiting at a farmer's place, and it was just a big cow-calf operation. They had a bunch of cows up near the farmhouse, and it was before air conditioning, and so the windows were open. And he said, "Man, how do you sleep with that?" And the farmer just took in a big whiff and said, "It smells like money to me."
That does sound like a farming expression. But, mentioning your grandfather, I like to look up people and see what I can find out. And I was shocked to find out that your grandfather was a big deal. I mean, Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, posthumously in the Country Music Hall of Fame, hee-haw, lots of awards. And I was like, wow. And then I'm not belittling the fact that you're an accountant, but when I think of accountant, I'm thinking you use the opposite side of the brain for that versus someone who is very musically talented. How did that come about?
Well, he really was self-learned, self-taught, and, had some mentors, of course, with the musical thing. But I've had a lot of kind of crossover there where I wasn't great at playing music. I really appreciate it and love it. And I've heard from quite a few different professors that there's some intertwine between being really good at mathematics and being a musician, because the chords have patterns to them and just kind of the way your brain works. Wow. There is, even though it can be opposite sides of the brain, the creative and the analytical, there is some interplay there between it.
Your family still has a lot of music influences. I mean, your wife is in a band, I saw. And so
I couldn't get away from it if I wanted to. So.
Well, but I like to think, and I don't know why I say this left brain, right brain, because it's something that I've looked at off and on and read articles about as I've gotten older, because, there are people that are one side dominated. And I think there is a group of people that are kind of equal on both sides. And I think that's where I kind of fall. I'm not real brilliant. I'm not like my dad or my brother that have math degrees. I went to law school because I couldn't do math, and so I had a lot of common sense, maybe I could talk my way out of a lot of problems. And so I kind of looked at myself as I was kind of an equal right brain, left brain. But in church, we would play games to see who we could trick to sit by my mother right as we came to sit down, because she sang loud and off key, and we would pick someone to, when we went to church, to say, okay, oh yeah, grandma, go ahead, oh yeah, you go ahead. And then as soon as she'd start singing, they would realize what we'd done, and they would go, oh, they would give us this hateful look, and then we would all laugh. But we like to play games like that. But
Oh,
what
my
so
wife's family's extremely musical too, from East Texas, which is where my granddad had grown up. And her
Mhm,
brother played with everybody from Taylor Swift to, you
mhm.
name it. And he's kind of a presence online and has his own instruction for bluegrass. And then that's what the twin sisters, my wife and her twin sister, do. And it's funny, they have this thing where they sing out of tune with each other on purpose just to annoy people. Like they'll sing happy birthday, it's like non-harmonic, or there's some technical term for it, but it's pretty
How
funny to
funny, how
hear the
funny.
first time.
So you went to McLennan Community College, then you went off and you went to Baylor. No, you went to Tarleton State University, which is where I got my master's degree. I mean,
I
when
did
did you?
slip into Baylor for a semester and was about as successful there as Willie Nelson was. So I did not finish there. It was a lot more. I was self-financed, and it was a little expensive for me at the
Oh
time. And
yeah,
so,
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, Baylor. Even back when I was wanting to go there, I couldn't afford it, and then of course my daughter went there, and so I know exactly how broke you are when you have family that goes to Baylor and you don't qualify for any student loans. It was very disheartening for 4 years. My daughter's like, "Why aren't we going on a trip this year?" I was like, "Well, because we sent that money to Baylor."
Yeah.
So what took you to Tarleton State?
They have a satellite campus associated with MCC, which is there in Waco, McLennan County. And
Ah,
I kind of shoehorned or bookended that together, where I finished my associate's degree and then directly went into Tarleton's accounting program.
mhm.
But most of it was in-person instruction at MCC's University Center. For
Yes.
it's great. Baylor's a great institution, but a lot of families don't have access to private universities just from funding or
Mhm.
availability. And Waco's one of the largest communities in Texas that's not served by a public university. And so my dad taught at MCC for 40 years, and he was one of the first graduates back in he went from 69 to 71, I think,
Mhm.
and later became faculty about 10 years later. He went down to Austin and Nashville and back. And MCC kind of bridged that since we didn't have a public university. They created a university center, which is open to campuses they partner with. And so Tarleton has most of their business degrees available. And I think they still have this where if one university starts a program, that another university can't start the same degree there. So, but Texas Tech and at least one or two other universities have mostly in person available degrees that you can go right there to the MCC campus in Waco and finish a 4 or 6 year degree with some master's programs there as well.
When I went to college, I was going to do a double major in political science and accounting, or I was going to have a minor in accounting. And so I got through one class of accounting, and I said, "Oh no, I am not going to do accounting." And so, what drew you to accounting?
I have my uncle that I'm closest to. He's still alive, Ron Pate. Gosh, I think about 4 years ago, got his 50 years of being a CPA.
Wow.
He's just over 80 now. And in the late 70s, he moved out to El Paso. And I didn't have any brothers, and he had 3 boys. And so my parents want to make sure I was around some guys. And so I'd go stay a week each summer out there with them, kind of cousin camp is what people call it these days. And so we were always pretty close, even though we weren't physically
Mhm.
close. And he'd invited me to come out and work for him. And it was a lot of experience. It was a lot of learning. But at the end of it, I kind of decided I'd rather not be an employer employee with him. Family and business don't always mix. But he's still love him to death. He's a great uncle. And but that's how I got my start in accounting, was working for him for 3 years straight.
Well, you seem really entrenched in the Waco community. You're a board member of the Waco Symphony Orchestra, former volunteer for Habitat for Humanity. former board member of the Waco Performing Arts Alliance and the Waco Kiwanis Club. I mean, how do you have time to do any work?
My wife and I were talking about that the other night. I'm not like actively trying to get off boards, but I've had to start telling people that two-letter word no for
Mm-hmm.
joining more things. The Rotary Club wanted me to join their board, and I was just like, let me get off something first
Yeah.
because gosh, about 5 or 6 years ago, Abbott appointed me to the Judicial Council,
Yeah.
and maybe it was at least 4 years ago, but it was, and that's been really interesting to kind of see the statewide judicial policy setting. I'm actually down in Austin today. We had a meeting of the data committee, and we're looking at how to better integrate case management systems with kind of a
Mm.
statewide database so that lawyers, judges, the entire legal system can have something more similar to the TAMES. It's called PACER at the federal level,
Sure.
where federal is very different than the way Texas organized their judiciary. I'm sure you're aware that at the federal level, the Supreme Court basically controls and manages the entire system.
Sure.
And we have some of that in Texas, but our founding fathers for the state envisioned a more fragmented system at every level and every way in all the branches. And so, as the elected clerk, we are the records management officer. We're in charge of
Mm-hmm.
organizing how the records are kept. Selecting a case management system is more of a modern thing. But there's probably 5 to 7 vendors that make a decent case management system. And having them all interplay together into the state system where they're trying to have a cohesive
Oh yeah.
tool. And one of the things I brought to the meeting today, the county perspective, and the chair of the committee is Judge Gravel out of Williamson County, and he was very receptive to it, as well as the other judicial members. Is why are we building a statewide system that's going to be a repository unless it can count as a backup to the local system?
Mm-hmm.
Because if you do that, every clerk in the state that's tied in and integrated could certify to go paperless. So they wouldn't need paper records anymore. But if they just from the top down make a system and it doesn't count as a backup repository, it's not an unfunded mandate, but it's a huge miss on we're doing all this work. Let's make it count for something for the locals
Well, but
too.
look at all the counties that have updated their case management system and in the last year. I mean, Tarrant County has done a changeover with, which was a
Mm-hmm.
fiasco when it was implemented. Bear County is going through
I
right
think they're
right
still in the
now.
process, aren't
Oh,
they?
oh
At the
yeah,
district court level.
but
Yeah.
but for bond forfeitures, what I deal with, and bail stuff. I mean, they were not. I mean, they were unable to even uh file. You were unable to file stuff for a while, and currently, because in Tarrant County, their system, the way they developed it, if once a judgment's entered, if you file a motion for a new trial and it's granted, their system doesn't have the ability to enter an amended judgment because it shuts down the
Huh.
wall after a judgment, and so they're waiting for an upgrade. And then
Wow.
Bear County is currently going through an upgrade from a system that's been around for many, many years, but upgrading to the Tyler Technologies one, and have had just as bad of results as the other counties had. And there was a rumor Dallas earlier this year was kind of subject to some spyware or ransomware, and they would never would confirm it, but they were down for a period of time too.
I know the county clerk there better than I know the district clerk, and he's the incoming president for the Clerks Association, John Warren, and it
Oh,
came
yeah.
up in our judicial committee meeting in May, I believe it was, for the data committee, that several of our large counties haven't been able to comply with the new reporting requirement, and both Dallas, Tarrant, and I think Bayer were the ones that were focused on, and several members of the committee, they don't have local government experience. And they're like, well, why are these people ignoring us? And I luckily was there and said, hey, I know a little bit about what's going on there, but not the whole picture. And it'd be better to
Mm-hmm.
let's call them individually and talk to them and say what's going on versus look at sanctions or those kind of. Some of the members of the committee were more concerned about, if we just ignore this, how does that look? And it's, well, I don't think they're ignoring this. They're
Yeah.
getting called to the carpet by their commissioners
They're
and the public
drowning.
and
They're
everybody
drowning
else.
because of a
Yeah.
changeover. But you imagine they've gone through this big changeover and spent all this money, and then the state comes in and wants to something that works with them. It just seems like, oh, they're going to be
Yeah.
like, oh, we're going to do it all over again, where everything's going to fall apart all over again.
Yeah.
And it's a nightmare. I know, we've been experiencing it, but that's just what happens. I think when you change over, you did that. I mean, it seems like you shepherded that in McLennan County with your office. And I mean, it sounds like you had a lot better results, but what was the difference?
Well, and we're actually looking at redoing what we've already done.
Mm-hmm.
So we mentioned earlier in our conversation kind of the number of case management vendors, and kind of one way to look at it is I've heard the term 800-pound gorilla, the big or the elephant in the room. And Tyler Technologies looms large. I've
Yeah.
met with their salespeople, and some of our county offices are going to their product, and it's a good product, but the way I look at it is it's three times the cost, roughly.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
there's some variances. That's just a rough number
Sure.
than what we have. And it could be even more than that once you consider SaaS and cloud hosting and some of these other things. So, what are we getting as a benefit for this increased cost? But that's only one cost, the actual dollars going out. And we learned this firsthand in the 16 time period. The fall of my first year in 15, we changed over jury systems from a COBOL
Mm-hmm.
database to a modern SQL database.
When I describe Cobalt, I'm like,
Yeah.
think of your very old system, which would, pre Windows kind of like DOS system, and think of
Oh,
something
pre
like that.
DOS. Yeah.
Yeah, pre DOS. And
Yeah.
that's going to
And,
be a lot of county systems.
and the weakness with staying with older technology that's reliable is, and this is where we were by the end of 17 or mid 17, we were the next to last county office to get off of that Unisys database system that was programmed in COBOL. And the legacy of the legacy of the legacy was who was supporting us. So Unisys had sold to
Mm-hmm.
another company,
Mm-hmm.
who'd
Yeah.
sold to another company, and they were jacking up the price for maintaining, for licensing the database software. We owned the database. It was internally
Sure.
made by programmers in our county, which was a good forward-looking thing back in the 80s. But staying with that language as it became antiquated, um, we got under the gun because they were doubling the price of our
Mm.
maintenance costs, because they were really concerned about their ability to find
Yeah.
programmers to
Mm-hmm.
help us resurrect the system if it died.
Was it like 10
So,
years ago? We would have never thought about the need for security from ransomware. I mean, the Texas
man,
courts, the appellate courts had ransomware a couple of years ago or several years ago. I
yes.
mean, I mean, it seems like we're having this whole conversation now when we're talking about our database system and our case management system, and we're having to deal with, well, what's the security? And you have to figure out, well, how did they breach the security in these others so that we don't have that happen? I mean, how much time do you have to spend on that?
Well, and that's so. From my understanding on what happened in that case, an employee at some level, either the appellate courts or at the OCA statewide, had gotten compromised, and then through clicking on an inappropriate email, not like it was a perverted email, but just a phishing email, trying to,
Yeah, somebody.
and then that
Yeah,
could,
I mean, we've all had that
and then
where
that
we get
spreads
an
through the
email,
system.
we get an email,
Yeah,
and we're like, is this real or not real? And I've even, I would think I'm advanced, but I have found myself clicking on when I should not have. And talk
mm-hmm.
about having your life flash in front of your eyes when you're working for the county or working for the
Yeah,
state courts, and you click on that little
yeah,
wrong email that you're just like, okay, it looks real enough, and then it turns
yeah.
out to shut down the whole system.
Well, and so the counties have mandates now from the state government. It went to the legislature and the governor signed into law, and it needed to happen, that we have mandated training and a course that meets a certain standard to kind of guard against, employees getting subject to phishing or other types of attacks.
Mm-hmm.
Because, there's our county of 268,000 people. I think we funded around, they're not all filled at once, but I think we're around 1,000 employees. And anyone that has a computer
Yeah.
could compromise the network or the system. And most counties are kind of on austerity because the commissioners are directly elected, and kind of in contrast to your municipalities, and I've noticed this looking at school boards and cities, there's an awful lot of, well, staff recommends.
Hmm.
Well, when you're on commissioner's court, it's more of a, I'm directly elected and I'm directly responsible for this budget,
Yeah.
and staff can recommend all they want, but I'm responsive to these taxpayers, and I want to make sure their tax rate doesn't go up, or we minimize the impact while still delivering all the services that we do. And that focus is more acute from what I've seen
Hmm.
across the state at
Yeah.
the county level than it is at the city and the school board, because those are very part-time positions, and there doesn't seem to be the responsibility or care from the voters that their city and school boards are as directly accountable fiscally.
Well, and it seems like there's a push pull between the state and the counties over, their ability to raise taxes, and you got to have a vote over, if you're going to raise property taxes over a certain amount,
Yeah.
and so, of course, they don't want that. They don't want to lose an election, and so it seems like
Mm-hmm.
everybody's like, oh, it's just a push from all sides.
I can give you an example on that. We've had a county judge, Scott Felton, who's just been, maybe budgeting genius is the wrong word, but some sort of fiscal genius, where he came in, the county wasn't bankrupt, it wasn't insolvent, but they were running out of money and spending more than was coming in. And so they hiked the tax rate by a nickel from like 45 or 47 to 52 cents per $100 on property tax. And then over 5 years, through austerity measures and growth, they were able to cut it back below that.
Wow.
And then every year since then, and that kind of precipitated, it was right before I got into office. Um, they're now in the mid to low 20s. And
Wow.
irrespective of what Austin did for austerity measures, like you can't raise your taxes more than the valuation, it's a seesaw. Our county was already leading the way on that. And for the last 5 years, we've been below the effective rate. And so the net taxes coming from each taxpayer on average is lower than it was 5 years ago for the county government.
What do you think the average voter in McLennan County thinks the district clerk does? Because I don't know what I think about that. I mean, because you do so many
Yeah.
things. I mean, what do you think the average voter or the average citizen in McLennan County thinks of what? I mean, you're the custodian of records of the district court, but that's so
Yeah.
small. That's such a small part of what you do.
Well, so civil and family cases, we're averaging between 4 and 5 thousand a year. On
Mm-hmm.
the criminal side, which is all felonies unless it's pled down to a lower charge, it's close to 3,000 a year. And then we were averaging around 600 or 700 juvenile, but those numbers have fallen off through different things where their cases are treated differently ahead of filing and kind of disposed of
Mm-hmm.
that way. And that's more of a background to most people. Obviously, the lawyers that are practitioners, they're going to know what we do. And so the legal community is well aware of us and they interact with us regularly. But
Absolutely.
that's probably less than 1% of the population. Even if you consider, like, if you support staff for law firms, it may get up to 1.5% of the population in Waco.
But
Even though
look at
we
all
have a
the
law school,
administrative duties you have. I mean, you've mentioned
yeah,
already some at the state. You're at the state capitol today, or you're in Austin
yeah.
meeting with groups today. And I mean, look at all the administrative stuff you do. And we don't even talking about case management software system, security for the case management system. We haven't even talked about COVID. But I mean, so
Yeah.
what made you
Well,
wake up one
accounting is a
morning?
huge part of it too. I mean,
Yeah,
I guess that
yeah,
fits into administration, but
yeah,
administration and finance are a little different. And I mean, every dollar that flows through cases, that's, if a court
yeah.
renders a judgment, you have to deposit it so much to appeal an appeals
Hmm.
bond that goes into the registry of the
Yeah.
court. All the awards for minors that are hurt
Mhm.
in cases, and there's a trust set up in the district clerk's account. We have almost 200 of those that we manage. And we're restricted on, we have to be very conservative. So it's basically shopping around local banks for good rates on
Sure.
CDs or money market accounts. And there's a lot of things I choose to do to be more active in the community, like being involved in Rotary and the
Sure.
Symphony,
Sure.
and trying to make sure that I'm out in the community so people that have questions or want help have a lifeline or a resource. And I think that part of being a public servant is being out in the public. I
There's only
think,
so many hours in the day too. I mean, come
yeah,
on. I
yeah,
mean, you could spend
yeah.
all your time at the courthouse and working in on security and software, dealing with issues, dealing with people, let alone going to Austin. And but kudos for be willing to interact with the public and being active in your community. I just think that speaks well of you. But what made you decide, hey, I'm going to run for district clerk? I mean, I know you're in your second term, but I mean,
Yeah.
honestly,
I'm
I
actually
would
my third.
see, I have the personality to be a politician, but my wife is such a private person. I would never put her through that. So what makes you want to be a politician?
So I started out when I moved back to Waco in 2000, helping other people get elected, and
Mhm.
was largely successful in that. And people would ask me to move to Austin or come work for a firm or something like that. And I just loved my community and wasn't really
Mhm.
looking to move away. And so eventually, some of the leaders in the Republican Party and um, just a friend at church, really, who's a deacon and had been a long time involved peripherally in politics, had said, I think you should run for this. And it was actually right about the time I was in high gear getting my accounting degree.
Mm.
And I'd saved up for a number of years to be able to afford that and just pay for it versus, it being a huge drain. And part of the deal was I said, I'm going to focus on this until it's done because I had gone to a few colleges and gotten distracted with politics and because I just had a passion for good government and
Sure.
trying to help others that I thought would be good in government get elected. And it had been a drain on finishing my degree. And so um, I I kind of fluffed it off, and then a few other people kept encouraging me to think about it. And so I went on a round of meetings with some of our district judges privately, and was strongly encouraged by them. And one of them even said, "If you don't run, it's a disservice to the community." And I I really thought and prayed about it, talked with my parents and other people, and some doors just really opened. And it was funny. My parents told their small church, and one of the people there works at a law firm, and they said her eyes got as big as saucers because that lady that's in there is mean. I'm like, oh no. And I wasn't worried about whoever it was because I wasn't going to run against them. But what I'd heard was from across the county government that it was dysfunctional. And,
Mhm.
the county government is designed to work more like the inside of a watch where all the gears are interfacing together and it's a team attitude. And, you know,
Mhm.
a lot
Well, I
of
like to think of
clerks,
it as it's personal relationships. I mean,
yeah, yeah,
I've been to a county where uh, new district attorney was elected 2 years in, kind of a little bit, I would just say nicely crazy. So the district clerk refused to talk to him. Every communication had to be in writing. And I mean, it got so bad that when the district attorney ran for reelection, he got less than 20% of the vote in his primary. So everybody in the community
uh,
know it was bad. But to me, everything in the courthouse is personal relationships. And it can be,
yeah.
a gossip mill too, but it's all personal relationships. You work better when you all work as a team, as you said.
I'm more of a collaborator, want to work with others. I mean, there are times where, you are the person in charge of this area and you need to make a decision that's best for your area. But many times there's not an absolute win versus a loss.
Mhm.
And it's more of a collaborative thing of what's best for the county as a whole. And I mean, we're kind of in that boat right now with the sheriff and the DA's office have already signed contracts to move to Tyler Technologies because that's what they felt was best for their offices. And our county clerk and I are weighing out whether that's best for our system. And it's not clear yet, and we're going to have to really get a good look at that system and see if it's an improvement. Because back to our earlier conversation, change management is a huge
Mhm.
drain on your time, and
Yes.
it's not like the courts stop functioning. You're
Yes.
still required by law to get everything through the system on top of preparing to change to something. So to me, if we're going to change, we have something that's totally functional. It needs to be because it's an improvement. And so if I don't see an improvement or a process improvement for us or something that's a win that's going to make it better, it would be a little foolish for me to put myself through that, my staff through that. A lot of times when you have big change like that, some people that are near retirement, instead of working another 3 or 4 years, you're seasoned people that are very
Hmm.
valuable to your office. They just retired,
Yeah. Yeah.
because it's not, it's why would they want to? They're only going to be there 2 years. Why would they want to have to relearn everything they
Oh,
already
yeah.
know?
It seems like to me when case management systems first came out, they were kind of opaque. They were stuff that the courthouse used, but now they're
Mm-hmm.
to the point where they have this portal, and so it's open to the whole public, or it can be open to attorneys if they have logins. And so now it's
Yeah,
just they've grown. It's something that it used to be something we never really saw, but it's how y'all manage cases now. It's so integrated with everything at the courthouse.
it really is integrated, whether it's integrated into the statewide system or not. At the local level, in a lot of the court systems our size and larger, and some of the smaller ones too, have spent the money to have public portals. We have
Hmm.
a public index that we started about 6 years ago. And so you can search for cases and see all the filings as far as the category of what the filing is. And the images you have to come down to the courthouse to see.
Sure.
Um, but the attorney portal that we pioneered uh, includes all the images as well, hosted, and they have logins. And
Hmm.
so they paid for about half of the development costs. And then, as you're aware, we collect special revenue fees, and so I was able to use some of that money to pay for the initial other half and the maintenance. And so,
When this stuff's all
um,
expensive, I mean, it's not cheap,
yeah,
and
I think
people are
it was
proud of
close
their
to,
work.
yeah, it was about $20,000 to get it up, and then we're spending, I think, about 7,500 a year, because the vendors having to host it on
Yes.
a website, make sure it's secure, daily have it
Yeah.
uploaded so that it's accurate, up to, it's about a 48-hour lag, so that everything's in the
Yeah.
system is up on the.
You already talked about you redid jury duty, the process for jury duty, but I mean, I don't think
Mhm.
people realize there's a big process and procedure and administrative uh, uh, part when you're calling people for jury duty. Talk about that for a little bit.
Okay, so it's shifted a little bit since I came in office in 2015. The legislature changed the law largely off of, and I know you focus a lot on bail bond issues, and that world has been kind of rocked by issues in Harris County. Well, guess what? So was the grand jury system. In 20 Ahead of 2015 session, there was an issue with the Harris County grand jury where, if I'm remembering correctly, there was a police officer on the grand jury as a member, which is totally appropriate and legal.
Hmm.
And I've had one of my county court of law judges serve as a juror as a foreman on an actual trial. But he was very careful to say, "Hey, I'm just a member. I'm not," because they wanted to look to him for
Sure.
leadership.
Hmm.
And he said, "That's not what the foreman does. I'm here to make, just like you, to make sure that justice is served. And this is a deliberative process." Well, sometimes grand juries have witnesses come in. And in this particular case, you had, if I'm remembering the facts right, it was a Caucasian male police officer and a African American female witness. And he evidently used his police skills to depose her to the grand
Hmm.
jury, which I don't know that that's inappropriate, but where the problem with grand juries seem to emanate is that it's secret. So no matter how we summons the grand jurors,
Yeah.
and that's what the public went to in Harris County was, oh, the district judge picked 5 people as commissioners who picked 5 people, and that's corrupt. And it's like, I saw that process play out two or
Yeah.
three times,
Hmm.
and it wasn't corrupt. We had accusations of corruption back when Twin Peaks happened,
Oh, I remember that one.
uh,
Yeah.
because the district judge that had just impaneled a grand jury right after Twin Peaks had happened, one of the grand jury commissioners was a former appellate justice who happened to be the father of our DA. Well, he's not on the grand jury, but he was able to have influence over who was on the
Oh.
grand
Hmm.
jury. And people thought, oh, no, it's corrupt. Well, I think the thing that people get more flustered about, because government is about transparency, is that it's
Hmm.
secret. And the grand jury proceedings need to be secret, and people aren't used to
Hmm.
that and they don't like it.
Yeah, and
Um,
that's a whole other problem because we've dealt with that at the legislature and the issue of grand juries we've been peripheral on, but only because the same groups pushing for criminal justice reform, bail reform, are also sometimes pushing for this reform for the grand juries, and even the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court sometimes seems to be aligned with what they would like to do. Let's
yeah,
allow defense attorneys into the grand jury, and I'm like, guys, we're not thinking this through because we can't have a mini trial before indictment. I mean, that's just going to,
yeah.
I mean, because then we have really smart attorneys that they know how to delay and, oh, well, I need to call this witness. Oh, well, then let's delay it another month until the next grand jury meeting. And so that's the worst thing we could do is add this whole administrative process. And I'm not saying that we don't need to improve. We always need to improve. But when we start thinking of solutions that are just going to intentionally cause chaos in the system, somebody needs to stand up and say, have we really thought this through? Have we really thought this through? And
Well, what I was going to say is, so that result from the law change meant that grand juries had to be summoned at random,
mm-hmm.
which the net result was we're summoning to get an appropriate amount of people there, about 150 citizens. And it's interesting. I get why we had the movement to do that, but the nice thing about the commissioner system was you had people that were interested
Yeah,
in serving. Versus when you do a random summons of the public, over half the people there that show up don't want to be there. And so the judge doesn't know which half those are. And they're having to try and find people that can serve in a functional way on a deliberative body. For
that's
us,
a really
it's
good
three
point.
months.
That's a great point because
And
you got people who are going to have a commitment over a period of time.
yeah, we do. And I know our county is different than many others, but like Harris County, they're probably meeting daily for a period of time, but because of the size of the county. But with ours having about 270,000 people, we're able to meet every other week. And we have two district courts that handle criminals. So one court does the first half of the term, and the other
Mm-hmm.
half does that second half. And they just alternate. And so it's 3 months of service, and it's generally 6 meetings. Sometimes it's seven, and sometimes we have to do a special meeting because something's happened.
Let's talk
Yeah,
for a little bit about the challenges y'all had during COVID, and how
sure.
the case backlogs really grew during that time period. And I want to
Okay.
talk briefly just about what y'all did during COVID. But I really want to focus on what were the lessons we've learned looking back.
Regular jury service, kind of we did that shift to the more modern system.
Mhm.
And we were in the process of upgrading that system, working with the vendor when one of the judges had heard about a system that Travis County has. And they had delays. I don't know if it was COVID related or what, but we waited for about 2 years to get a workable solution from that. And it just didn't work out. So we've ended up signing a contract to go with Tyler for their system. And both systems have the same or similar functionality where the jurors will be able to go online to check
Mhm.
in, fill out their questionnaire, make sure they meet the qualifications, claim an exemption, or reschedule. And most of these things can be done without staff interaction, which is a huge time savings for us because I've got 12 employees on my criminal side of the office, criminal and juvenile, and a good fraction of their time is public phone calls related to jury service. And
Yeah.
so if we can get that more automated, we're able to be freed up to process documents.
What percentage of an IR that's called in for
Mm-hmm.
a potential to be uh, to be uh, to be, I don't know, you give them the oath and you give them the qualifications and you try to pick juries
Yeah.
from them, or you randomly pick groups to send to courtrooms for them. What percentage don't show up in McLennan County?
So we had, and this kind of ties back into your previous question about COVID and the
Mhm.
hits on the system. So one effect was jury service. I mean, obviously that's in person. Um, the guidance at the time and what people bought into was social distancing. And so I would joke privately that it was spread them out, spread everybody out.
Yeah, yeah.
Our courtrooms are designed for veneer, and then we have a central jury room that we use every week to bring in new people to get sorted for the courts. That's pack it in. It's the
Yeah,
opposite of
it
spread them
is.
out.
It is. It
And
absolutely is.
so we went from at the beginning of COVID having 5 district courts and 2 county courts of law. We added a court both at the county court and district court level, and we also have 6 JPs. there were no trials for a year and a half.
A year and a
Um,
half, a year and a
yeah,
half. I mean, I
yes,
mean, you've already
and
given us the
that's
numbers
despite
on
our
those.
efforts. We
Yeah.
we were constantly, not constantly, but regularly. We tried to use the convention center. Well, that facility is not designed to be secure. And when you're
Mm,
doing felony trials, you need a secure facility. Number one, you might have an inmate under custody and you don't want them to escape. Number two, you've got to control access where the jurors are not in the same place as the public or the, milling around in an inappropriate area and hearing things they shouldn't. You've got to, courthouse security had a lot of requirements for what they needed, and we couldn't meet that um,
wow.
at the convention center, and that's a city property. So it's a different governmental entity who was trying to be a good partner and help us out, but
Sure.
they had their own set of specs and requirements. And the county owns our local fair facility. And so we had a new expo center that had opened up called the base. And so its first use for the public was spaced out juries. And while that facility is huge and we could physically fit two courtrooms in there, it wasn't designed to be able to be broken up in a useful
Mhm.
way where we could have two trials. So we could impanel one district court per time. And then we could send a panel for a county court downtown to our old room that would hold 300 people. We could fit, the 20, 25 prospective jurors in there and the lawyers and judges and all the other people. You're talking about 40 or 50 people in a room that used to hold
Yeah.
300. And then we kind of did a shifting thing to where, people were tired of lots of it. And so we kind of condensed down and we were able to do two district court trials and a county court trial. And then we just went away. Let's get back to normal. And
Well, you go a year and a half without trying cases, you're backlog because you're still filing. You may not be filing as many, but you're still filing criminal cases,
mm-hmm,
and you've got this whole already a backlog. They're not getting resolved. So, I mean,
yeah.
if someone was to ask you what are the lessons that the government learned during COVID? So, if the next pandemic, what's your recommendation on some of the stuff we learned as a result of COVID?
Man, so and that one of the things that affects is how many people show up from a summons. So
Mm-hmm.
I used to send out about 600 to 700 summons a week to get a decent qualified pool. So there is an issue with no shows, and we deal with that periodically when it gets above a certain percentage. But there's really the toolbox there is pretty draconian, and
Mm-hmm.
most judges who have to run for election don't want to be the hammer,
Yes.
especially over something like jury service, unless it's just out of control. And so we kind of have to watch that and say, where's our pain threshold? That's going to be one of the nice improvements with either of the two choices we had, both Travis County system and Tyler's. If you skip jury service, you can have it automatically resummon them for another, period of
Ooh.
time out. And then if you ignore that one, you can send a fine. So we tried twice, and we know that you got it. And if you don't get it, well, here's $100 fine. Or we can work through that with the judges on what our policy will be. But we at least have some tools. Whereas right now, I can send out a show cause hearing notice, and we've done that a few times. And you get people, well, my daughter had her baby, and I was at the hospital,
Sure.
or whatever
Sure.
it is, and the last thing on their mind is jury service. And
Mm-hmm.
most what we saw with our several rounds of show cause hearings we did pre-COVID was kind of the joke was you didn't want those jurors, and it wasn't because they're bad people, but they were so distracted at the
Sure.
time they wouldn't have been a good juror, or they're irresponsible. And do you really want someone that just wanted to ignore a summons to decide someone's fate? um, and then you get into issues with it's supposed to be a cross section of the community, so if you're not getting a true cross section, are you really getting a valid jury
But
pool?
is one of the lessons of COVID is that shutting down the courthouse should be the very last option. I mean, because of the
Yeah,
damage it does for years to come afterwards.
and that's the thing. So even though we focused on the criminal side first, and those people could be sitting in jail without a bond, I mean, that ties back into the group
Mm-hmm.
that we're talking with here, and that sucks to be forced to wait without bond
Right.
or bail in a county jail. Well, then you start reopening the system. Civil and family is put on the back burner. They didn't have jury
Yeah.
trials available for way longer than a year and a half. It was closer to 2 or 3 years. It was probably 2.5 years, I think. So it that's even further backlogged. So the one thing that's kind of helped relieve that is we happened to in COVID go ahead and get another district and county
Hmm.
court.
Yeah.
So our Judge Menard, who retired last year, as the new district court was coming online, in we had the district court delayed a year just because we're really out of space and we're having to go through a new justice center project as well. So growth has its problems as well.
Yeah. Hmm.
Um, she was rebalancing the load last summer as so that now we have four spigots on instead of three, so the
Hmm.
cases can flow faster.
Wow.
So I mean, it's a cost to the public. If your wife or husband or was hurt in a car wreck and you're having to sue over it,
Hmm.
and you're out the money because your car was totaled and the insurance maximum was exceeded, and you know all the money that you would get in the lawsuit in a lot of car wreck cases, a fair amount of it goes to the lawyer, and then a lot of it's just reimbursing that stuff out of pocket. It's not like you won the lottery by
Yeah. Yeah.
getting hit by in a car accident. There's caps on everything.
Over the last decade, we've started this system of reporting to OCA where we're
Mm-hmm.
reporting the cases that are pending. I think SB6 2 sessions ago, we were supposed to be reporting FTAs, and we have, the judges are reporting, and maybe, I mean, I don't know whether it's your office, the court coordinators or the court clerks that are reporting, but the bail form is reported to
Yeah.
OCA on what the bail is set. And we're having issues like on SB6, the magistrate is reporting the initial setting, but
Mm-hmm.
the modifications. So if someone files a motion to modify the bond, in a lot of the state, the modifications are not being reported to OCA. And it's really, I'm not critical of it because when OCA first
Yeah.
released their system, they even said we don't have a process for doing modifications. So the whole first round of training, they didn't know how to do that. And so they implemented it later. But if in the 2023 Bell Report, we're going to podcast on that in a month. But if you took away El Paso and Denton, there's 4 or 5 small counties reporting modifications, but nobody else in the state. I mean, have you had any discussions about? Well, first of all, who's doing the reporting? Is it the judges, or is it the court clerk, or is it a combination of the above? Um, and have y'all had any
I,
discussions
I'll
on
give
that?
you an answer, and I think it's accurate, but I could be off on it because in our county we have an office called pretrial services,
Ah,
and
okay.
there's
And,
a magistrate there called
mhm.
his name is Judge Bain, and he has a staff of 3 or 4 or 5 people, and they're pretty strained between the bail reports. That is a serious reporting requirement. I'm not sure if his staff, because you regularly, not every day, but and it's not an occasional thing, the district judge at arraignment or at some point in the case
Mhm.
because of something that happens and the
Sure.
DA highlights it, or it's usually not the defense attorney highlighting it. There's a reason to increase bail requirements
That's right.
because they've either committed a crime or something else has happened that this person's a higher flight risk or they're a danger to the community in some way, and that is happening regularly, not
Sure.
every day, but regularly.
Sure.
And those are handled in district court. I'm not sure if their court administrators are handling that requirement or if they give the amended down to the pretrial services office to do that. That's where my question mark is I'm not sure who's.
I'm going to be looking at that more in preparation for that podcast. But let's talk about
Yeah.
dispositions and case reporting. Is that automated on your
Yeah.
system? And so when
Kind of.
what does that mean? Kind of.
Yeah, so we've been working towards automated. I think what we're going to be at within a year. So maybe by the end of this year. And from what I'm seeing, this came up in the data committee today.
Yeah.
There's a mandate both in state law, and I think the Supreme Court has some additional mandates that some things are reported monthly for the big five or big six counties, the case level data, and then just like e-filing,
Mhm.
phased in by bracketing. So the bigger your county, the sooner they're required to do it because that's a huger, larger percentage of the data mix
Sure.
for the state. So, like what Harris County is not quite a third of the um, population of the state, but it's I think more than a third of the data set for the legal system.
Wow. Wow.
Um, and so, missing Harris County you don't have a good data set. And the
That's
same
right.
was happening, and that's when it came up.
Yeah.
Dallas, Tarrant, Bayer, Travis. I
Yeah.
think Collin County's mixed up into that over a million. And now, according to the census estimates, if you go off of that, Denton County's in it as well. They're just barely
Yeah.
over a million. But for these bracketed things, I think they're going off the census that happens every 10 years. So they're just barely out of it.
Well, and that's
But
kind of my
so
point
that,
is when you get data, it's got to be good data. And, when you got a
yeah,
report that says in a footnote that Harris County's misdemeanor courts are not doing the public safety report because of whatever, and within your conclusions are not accurate because Harris County misdemeanor
mm-hmm,
courts is a huge percentage. I mean, that impacts your
yeah,
number. But you mentioned, and so I don't want to miss talking about it. You
yeah.
mentioned that you were appointed to the Texas Judicial Council by Governor Greg Abbott.
Yeah.
What do you do as under your appointment to the Texas Judicial Council?
So they get to set policy for the statewide judicial system. So
Mm-hmm.
you automatically have the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court and another justice, Evan Young's the other one currently, and then a similar composition from the Court of Criminal Appeals. And then the appellate courts are represented, the district courts are represented, the county courts are represented, the JPs. Uh, we have a county judge, Judge Gravel from
Mm-hmm.
Williamson County, and then the bar gets 2 or 3 positions, and then the governor gets 5 positions, I believe, for members of the public. And so I was slipped in there. As far as the lady that managed my appointment in the governor's office said, as far as she could tell, I was the first clerk to be put on this committee. And I knew her through other political circles and had talked to her over the years about just the ivory tower in Austin doesn't understand what's happening at the ground level
Mm-hmm.
across the state. And it's not an attack on the ivory tower or the
That's right.
centralized system, but we're in a tricky position for Texas because of how we set up our system. And there's many advantages to having a fragmented level of government. So if you don't like your district judge, your district clerk, your county clerk, you can vote them out every 4 years. You have an opportunity to hire and fire.
But we're fragmented
And
because
so if
we
I
pushed
was,
all that cost to the counties. If we did done it by the state, we wouldn't be so fragmented, like on having county by county data.
yeah, I don't think that's what was forefront on our founders' minds. I think it was about local
Well,
control,
yeah, I agree with that.
not the monetary aspect. And like they would have a collector of hides tax, like that's still in the state constitution. How many people are harvesting hides in Texas and selling them? I mean, that's just not a thing really anymore in modern,
Yeah.
at least not in modern Texas, maybe up in Montana or Canada or something, but there's just not fur trapping going on, so, or other hide collection. So, I mean, our Constitution was envisioned back in the late 1800s, the current one, and
Well,
it's been amended hundreds of times.
I agree with you
Yeah,
on the local control because even to this
yeah,
day in the House, I mean the way you defeat a bill in the House is not Republican, Democrat. It's large county, small county. It's cost. It's
yeah.
an unfunded mandate, and it's a big cost to the small county. So local control, I think, still drives a lot of politics in the House today.
And I think that's why so many areas are bracketed by population because something that makes sense for a Harris County, which
Mm-hmm.
is one of the most populous counties in the nation, out in Loving County, where they're struggling to have enough people that
Mm-hmm.
are citizens to fill all the elected positions. And it's seen some growth. It's grown from 79 to 100 and something. But it's just, you have to have brackets in many of these areas where there are 254 counties, and I'm in tax building right now, Texas Association of Accounting, so I'd have a
Uh,
room. And their motto is there's 254 ways to do things. And they don't mean that you're not following the laws, but it's just what makes sense in a rural county in the Panhandle or East Texas
absolutely.
that hasn't seen the growth of the Metroplex or Harris County just doesn't pan out for the average citizen.
Talk to us a little bit about what does the future hold from policy, maybe
Yeah.
data things for the state for our court system. What is the future hold, or what are y'all talking about maybe for the future?
Well, and that kind of ties back into your previous question because one of the things I thought about was this case management issue is forefront for clerks, and it's probably back of the burner for people in the bail bonds field. I mean, it definitely affects it. Charlie Pickens, that we mentioned before we started recording, is one of the most forward-thinking bail bondsmen I've met, and
Absolutely.
has has a data system that he's paid to integrate so that he can keep up with all the aspects of his business. And in the modern era, good businessmen, good governments
Mm-hmm.
have integrated data systems that work well with each other. Some of the laws we've had and requirements for reporting a bail bond, looking at someone, they didn't know if he's pulled over on a traffic ticket here and, reckless driving affect, a bail bond. Maybe it was a family violence thing after an attempted murder, something like that. And we had some people die. And sometimes it's sad. It takes people dying for the government to react. It's government's usually a reactive thing. The local example I saw was railroad crossing.
Charlie Pickens, I think, is the best example. I think of the bail industry
And
usually.
it takes somebody dying.
Well, I think of the bail
I'm sorry.
industry is usually behind on technology, and then Charlie Pickens, when you pulled him out as an example, he's like the perfect example of you can teach an old dog new tricks all the time because
Yeah.
he's the most
Yeah.
advanced technology bondsman I've ever seen, and he's very talented
Yeah.
at it, and he does a very good job. And we should
Yeah.
all try to be at his level. And when I try to compare myself to him, I think I'm advanced. But when I look at him, I'm like, I'm still driving an Edsel.
Well, and it's takes innovators like that, and that's kind of, gosh, I heard this in some of the business classes I took. Um, someone joked about the speed of business versus the speed of government back in the early 2000s. It might have been Bill Gates, but you just think about the speed of change in our business environment versus our government, and government nearly always lags behind. And some of it is you can be penny wise and pound foolish. I'm saving the county or the whatever money by staying with what I have because it's stable and it works,
Mm-hmm.
versus I'm trying to innovate. And so there's a disincentive for government to be innovative, because if you try something new and it fails, well, you failed. But there's a way to try out innovations without messing up the system, and that's what we're trying to do with our jury system, where people can check in online. We're still going to have the traditional system for everyone else, but eventually it's going to move to, you have to go online to check in. And with the case management stuff, we're being cajoled by the Supreme Court and the legislature, or pushed to get a more statewide integrated system. And I mean, looking from the local perspective, one thing that would help everybody get there, the PACER system was paid for by the Supreme Court of the US. What we have is 254 counties paying vendors for case management systems.
That's right.
And it is at least hundreds of millions of dollars a year, and it's private business. So there's no money coming from on high. It is a local unfunded mandate to pay for all these systems. And now we want them to all be integrated. It's still not a funded mandate.
Yeah.
And that's where the problem is I had a appellate justice tell me, we could have solved this 30 years ago if the Supreme Court got the money to develop case management systems for everybody. But, that's a heavy ask. It's a heavy lift to do these statewide projects. And the legislature's used to looking at, other problems.
I understand the wanting the statewide database, but also I understand not paying for it. So, I mean, talk about
Yeah.
unfunded mandate. If you say, well, all these five major vendors all have to be able to interact and upload and do and talk to a state system, I mean, that cost would be incredible because those five vendors would be spending a lot of money on trying to set up how that would happen.
Well, and then you have to look at what's the competitive advantage. One of those vendors is also the vendor that's doing the statewide system.
Well, I feel like I have just monopolized your time for this afternoon, but I want to thank you so much for talking to me and all these issues. I know I really enjoy talking about the district clerk's office and all these things, and I want to thank you for spending your hour with us.
Well, I'm happy to. We could do it again sometime. I mean, there's more to talk about if you get the time.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
Yes, sir.
Thank you for listening, and come back for the next episode of The Bell Post.